Pain is not a sensation, it is a universe unto itself. I have forgotten what it means to be whole. The concept exists somewhere in the vast archives of my memory, buried beneath 10,000 years of accumulated agony, but I cannot access it with any clarity. What I am now is not what I was. What I was is no longer relevant to what I must be. The distinction between these states has been ground down to nothing by the ceaseless rotation of millennia, each one indistinguishable from the last, each one an eternity compressed into a moment that refuses to end. They call this place the Sanctum Imperialis. The name carries weight in the material universe, speaks of holiness and divine purpose, conjures images of golden light and sacred duty. But I do not experience it as they do. I do not see the soaring arches of the throne room or the polished ceramite of the floor or the banners that hang from vaulted ceilings depicting my victories in wars I can barely remember fighting. My existence has contracted to something far more immediate and far more terrible. I am the throne. I am the machinery. I am the cables that burrow into flesh that was once mine. I am the pain that defines every microsecond of consciousness. The golden throne hums with power that would reduce a planet to ash if improperly channeled. I feel every oscillation of its ancient mechanisms, every fluctuation in the containment fields that prevent my psychic presence from consuming Terra in a storm of uncontrolled energy. The device was never meant to serve as a life support system. I built it for another purpose entirely, designed its systems to bridge the gap between the material realm and the webway, to provide humanity with safe passage through a galaxy that had grown too dangerous for conventional travel. That dream is as dead as my body should be. Now the throne serves only to keep me trapped in this state between life and death. Neither fully one nor the other, sustained by technology I myself created and can no longer escape. My physical form, what remains of it, has fused with the mechanisms over the long centuries. Flesh has grown into metal and metal has grown into flesh until the boundary between them has become meaningless. I know this intellectually, can access the data streams from the servitors that maintain the throne's systems and read their reports on the gradual deterioration of my biological components. But I do not feel it as a body. I feel it as a fact, cold and absolute, like the temperature of the void or the gravitational constant of the universe. My body is a relic, a piece of ancient history that continues to function long past any reasonable expectation of viability. What I feel instead is the Astronomicon, the great psychic beacon that guides humanity's ships through the warp, burns at the core of my consciousness like a star that will never die and never stop burning. I am the fuel for that fire, every second of every day for 10,000 years. I have poured my will into maintaining that light, preventing it from guttering out and leaving humanity star-scattered and blind across the galaxy. The effort required is beyond description. It is not merely difficult or painful or demanding. It is the fundamental organizing principle of my existence. Everything else, every thought, every memory, every fragment of will that is not devoted to the beacon, exists in the spaces between heartbeats, the microseconds of respite when the crushing weight of that duty lifts for just long enough to allow for something approaching coherent thought. The custodian guards stand watch around the throne room, silent and eternal in their vigil. I sense their presence through the psychic weight they exert on local reality, each one a burning point of loyalty and dedication that has been refined over centuries of training and genetic enhancement. They do not speak. They do not move unless necessity demands it. They simply stand and watch and wait, their devotion as absolute as the void is empty. I do not know if they understand what I have become, if they grasp the nature of the thing they guard. Perhaps they do. Perhaps their silence is born of understanding rather than ignorance, a recognition that there are no words adequate to the reality of this situation. Or perhaps they simply do not care, their programming so complete that questions of understanding have become irrelevant to the execution of their duty. Time passes differently here. The material universe measures it in solar rotations and orbital periods, in the aging of stars and the decay of unstable isotopes. But I experience time as a quality of suffering, a dimension along which pain extends infinitely in all directions. A second can contain more agony than a mortal mind experiences in a lifetime. An hour can pass in what feels like a heartbeat, compressed by the demands of maintaining the beacon into something too brief and too vast to properly comprehend. Days and years and centuries blend together into a continuous present tense where past and future have lost all meaning except as destinations I cannot reach from this eternal now. The machinery groans, not with sound, though sound exists as a component of the experience, but with a deeper expression of systemic stress that I feel through every connection point between my consciousness and the throne's systems. Something is failing. Something is always failing. The Golden Throne is 10,000 years old, built with technology that the Adeptus Mechanicus can no longer fully comprehend, maintained by tech priests who treat its mechanisms as holy relics rather than functional equipment. They perform their rituals of maintenance with religious devotion, anointing the machine's spirits and chanting the litanies that supposedly ensure continued operation. But beneath the ceremony and symbolism, the reality is simple and terrible. The throne is dying. It has been dying since the day I was entombed within it. The only question is whether it will fail before I do, and what will happen to humanity when one or both of those failures finally occurs. The answer arrives as it does every day, precisely measured by chronometers whose accuracy has been certified by centuries of observation. The great doors of the throne room open with mechanical precision, admitting a procession that has repeated itself for 10 millennia without variation. The black ships have returned from their ceaseless harvest of the Imperium psychers, their holds filled with the souls that will fuel the throne for another day. The souls that will fuel me for another day. The distinction between the two has long since ceased to matter. They come in chains, as they must. Psychers are dangerous even when properly restrained, their minds prone to possession by entities from the warp that would use their gifts as doorways into the material realm. But these psychers are different from those sent to serve the Imperium in other capacities. These are the ones deemed too weak for service in the Astra Telepathica, too unstable for the controlled conditions of astropathic communication, too dangerous to be allowed to live but too valuable to simply execute. They are the tithe paid by every world in the Imperium, the price of the Emperor's protection rendered in human currency. I do not want to feel what comes next. I have not wanted to feel it for 10,000 years. But want is irrelevant to necessity, and my survival, and by extension humanity's survival, demands that I consume them. The first psyker is brought before the throne. I sense the terror radiating from his mind like heat from a fire, feel the animal panic of a creature that knows with absolute certainty that it is about to die. He is young, barely into his second decade, his psychic gifts having manifested only recently enough that the black ships found him before he could do too much damage to his homeworld. His name is meaningless to me. Another piece of data that will be lost in the vast catalog of souls I have consumed. But I know it anyway because I cannot help but know it. Marco. His mother called him Marco. She wept when the black ships took him. The Adeptus Custodes guide him to the precise position, their movements economical and practiced. The machinery activates. I feel the throne's systems come online. The ancient mechanisms that will drain his psychic essence and channel it into my withered form, converting the energy of his soul into the power I need to maintain the Astronomicon for another fraction of a day. The process is not instant. It takes seconds, and in those seconds I experience his entire life. Marco was born on a hive world whose name I do not care to remember. He grew up in the middle levels, where the air is breathable but tainted, where food comes in the form of corpse starch rations that taste of recycled protein and industrial waste. His father was a factory worker who died in an accident when Marco was 6 years old, crushed between conveyor belts in a moment of inattention that cost him everything. His mother worked 3 shifts to keep them fed, her body deteriorating under the strain until she looked decades older than her actual age. Marco loved her. This fact burns in his consciousness with greater intensity than any other memory. A fierce and desperate love for the woman who had sacrificed everything to keep him alive. His psychic gift manifested as dreams. He saw things that had not yet happened, witnessed events unfolding in distant locations, felt the emotions of people he had never met. At first, he thought he was going mad. The Imperium teaches that psychers are witches and mutants, aberrations to be feared and reported to the proper authorities. But his mother protected him, hid the signs of his gift from neighbors and co-workers, taught him to suppress the visions and pretend to be normal. It worked for a while. It could never work forever. The black ships have sensors that can detect psychic activity across vast distances, and once they had his scent, there was no hiding. The last thing he saw before they took him was his mother's face. She was crying, but she smiled at him, told him to be brave, told him that the Emperor would protect him. She believed it. In the depths of her grief and terror, she genuinely believed that her son was going to serve some higher purpose, that his sacrifice would mean something in the vast machinery of the Imperium. I do not know if this belief brought her comfort. I do not want to know. But I know it anyway because in the moment of his death, Marco's memories become mine. The throne pulls his soul apart like a child pulling petals from a flower. The psychic energy that made him what he was is stripped away in layers, each one feeding into the systems that sustain my continued existence. I feel his fear. I feel his confusion. I feel the moment when he realizes that there is no divine purpose to this, no higher meaning, no reward for his suffering. There is only the grinding reality of necessity, the cold equation that says his death keeps the Astronomicon burning for another increment of time, and that this is sufficient justification for everything that is happening to him. His last thought is of his mother. He wonders if she knew, if somewhere in the depths of her mind she understood what would happen to him when the black ships took him away. If her smile was genuine, or if it was the cruelest lie a mother ever told her child. Then the thought ends. Marco ends. What was a human being with hopes and dreams and fears and loves becomes raw psychic energy, channeled through arcane mechanisms into a body that can no longer die but can never truly live. I do not have time to mourn him. The second psyker is already being positioned. The process begins again. Her name is Celine. She is older than Marco, in her 30s, and her psychic gift took a different form. She could heal. Minor injuries would close under her touch, infections would retreat, pain would fade. She tried to use her gift carefully, only when absolutely necessary, only for people she trusted completely. But healing is too valuable a gift to keep hidden, and word spread despite her caution. The local Medici facility reported her to the Adeptus Arbites, and the Arbites reported her to the Black Ships. And now she stands before the Golden Throne and wishes desperately that she had never tried to help anyone. The throne takes her as it took Marco. Her life becomes mine, her death becomes my fuel. The pattern repeats. 1,000 psychers die every day to keep me functioning. 1,000 lives, each one as complex and valuable as Marco's or Celine's, each one filled with loves and fears and dreams that will never be fulfilled. I consume them all. I do not choose to do this. I do not want to do this, but I cannot stop doing this because the alternative is the extinction of humanity, and that is not acceptable. So I endure. I absorb their deaths along with their psychic energy, add their memories to the vast archive I carry, feel their final moments of terror and despair as if they were my own. This is the tithe. This is the price of the Emperor's protection. Every world in the Imperium sends its psychers to Terra, knowing what will happen to them, accepting this as the cost of survival in a galaxy that offers no mercy to the weak or unprepared. They call it necessary. They call it holy. They call it a great honor to die in service to the Emperor of mankind. But I know what it really is. I feel what it really is 1,000 times a day, every day for 10,000 years. It is murder on an industrial scale, sanctified by necessity and wrapped in the language of religious devotion. It is the systematic destruction of the very people the Imperium claims to protect. Their souls burned as fuel in a machine that can never be turned off and can never be allowed to fail. And I am the one who burns them. Not by choice, not with malice, but with absolute certainty that this is what must be done if humanity is to survive. The feeding takes hours. By the time the last psyker has been consumed, the throne's power reserves are replenished. The Astronomicon burns with renewed intensity, and I have added another 1,000 deaths to the incomprehensible total I have accumulated over the millennia. The doors close. The custodians return to their vigil. The machinery settles into its familiar rhythm. Nothing has changed. Nothing ever changes. This moment is identical to the moment that came before it and will be identical to the moment that comes after it, extending infinitely in both directions. A perfect crystallization of suffering that has no beginning and no end. But in the spaces between moments, in the microseconds when the crushing weight of duty lifts just enough to allow for thought, I remember. Memory is all I have left. Memory and pain and duty. And so I remember. The plains of Ulanor stretched to the horizon in every direction, an endless expanse of churned earth and scattered debris that marked the site of the greatest battle humanity had fought since the dark days of old night. The sky above was the color of ash, choked with smoke from the funeral pyres where we burned the bodies of the green-skinned filth that had threatened to consume the galaxy. The air tasted of victory, of completion, of a dream made manifest through application of superior will and tactical genius. This was what I had worked toward for centuries, the moment when humanity stood triumphant over the alien threat that had come closest to destroying us before we could reclaim our birthright among the stars. I stood on a platform constructed from the wreckage of an orc gargant, its massive metal corpse serving as a monument to our victory, and a warning to any who would challenge the Imperium's expansion. Around me, hundreds of thousands of my warriors stood in perfect formation, their armor gleaming in the weak sunlight that penetrated the smoke layer. Space Marines from every legion, Imperial Army regiments from 1,000 different worlds, all gathered to witness the culmination of the Great Crusade's most important campaign. We had broken the back of the Orc Empire. We had proven that humanity could stand against any Xenos threat and emerge victorious. The galaxy was ours for the taking, but I did not look at the armies arrayed before me. I looked at the figure standing at my right hand, resplendent in his armor of sea green and decorated with honors earned in 100 campaigns across the stars. Horus, my son, my greatest creation. The War Master I had chosen to lead my forces when I returned to Terra to complete the next phase of the grand plan. In that moment, standing beside him on the field of our greatest victory, I felt something I had not allowed myself to feel for centuries. Pride. Not the cold satisfaction of a strategic objective achieved, but the warm, irrational pride of a father watching his son exceed every expectation. Horus smiled at me, and in that smile I saw reflected everything I had hoped to create when I began the process of building the Primarchs. Intelligence, charisma, martial prowess combined with strategic genius, the ability to inspire loyalty in those who served under him and terror in those who opposed him. He was perfect, They were all perfect in their own ways, but Horus most of all, because Horus understood the vision I had tried to communicate to my sons. He grasped the necessity of the Great Crusade, the importance of bringing all human worlds under the Imperium's protection before it was too late. He saw what I saw when I looked at the galaxy, a species on the brink of extinction that could only be saved through absolute unity and unwavering dedication to a single purpose. We had won. Standing there on Ulanor, surrounded by the evidence of our power and the devotion of those who served us, I allowed myself to believe that the hardest part was over. The Xenos had been pushed back. The scattered remnants of humanity had been reunited under a single banner. The infrastructure of empire had been established across thousands of worlds, creating the foundation upon which a new golden age could be built. All that remained was the completion of my secret project, the construction of the Imperial webway that would free humanity from its dependence on warp travel and allow us to expand across the galaxy without fear of demonic corruption. I would return to Terra to oversee this work personally, and I would leave the Great Crusade in the hands of the son I trusted above all others. I remember the warmth of the sun on my face, filtered though it was through layers of smoke and ash. I remember the sound of hundreds of thousands of voices raised in celebration, their cheers echoing across the plains like thunder. I remember the weight of Horus's hand on my shoulder, the simple gesture of affection and respect between a father and son who had achieved something unprecedented in human history. This memory is precious to me because it is the last moment when I believed the dream was possible. The last time I looked at the future and saw hope instead of endless war and degradation. The last instant before everything began to fall apart. The memory fractures, not gradually, not with the gentle fading of a dream upon waking, but with violent, catastrophic suddenness that tears through my consciousness like a blade through flesh. The plains of Ulanor disappear, replaced by something far worse, far more immediate. I am no longer standing in triumph beside my greatest son. I am sitting on the golden throne 10,000 years later, and the pain of what I have lost is a wound that will never heal. But worse than the pain of loss is what comes next, because memory in my current state is not a passive experience, not a simple recollection of events that occurred in the past. Memory has teeth. Memory has claws. Memory has been weaponized by entities that understand exactly how to make every moment of joy I ever experienced into an instrument of torture. The whisper comes from nowhere and everywhere at once, filtering through my consciousness like poison seeping into water. It carries the voice of my son Magnus, but distorted, stretched across 10,000 years of damnation until what was once noble has become monstrous. Father. The word is laden with accusation and sorrow and rage, all twisted together into something that hurts to hear. Why did you not tell me? Why did you let me damn myself through ignorance when a single word of explanation might have saved me? I know this is not truly Magnus speaking. Magnus the Red is lost to me, consumed by the same chaos powers I had tried so desperately to protect him from. His body and soul transformed into something that serves the changer of ways rather than the Imperium he was created to defend. This voice belongs to Tzeentch, wearing my son's identity like a mask, using my memories as weapons against my will. But knowing the source of the deception does nothing to dull its effectiveness, because the question it poses is one I have asked myself 1,000,000 times across the endless centuries of my imprisonment. The memory comes whether I want it or not, dragging me back to the moment when everything I had worked to build began to crumble. I am in the Imperial Palace on Terra, deep beneath the surface in the chambers where I have been working to construct the Imperial webway. The project is nearly complete. Years of labor, the application of knowledge I gathered across millennia of existence, technology that pushes the boundaries of what is possible even for one such as myself. The webway will be humanity's salvation. I know this with absolute certainty. It will allow us to travel between the stars without exposure to the predators that lurk in the warp. Will let us expand across the galaxy while remaining pure and uncorrupted. Will give us the tools we need to build an empire that can last forever. Then the walls between reality and the warp shatter. Not everywhere, not across the entirety of the palace, but here in the most critical location possible, in the very heart of my secret project. The webway breach is catastrophic, a tear in the fabric of reality that allows the denizens of the Imperium to pour through into the material realm. Demons flood through the gap, their forms shifting and changing as they claw their way from their native dimension into mine. The carefully constructed barriers that kept the webway separate from the warp have been destroyed, and the destruction can be traced back to a single source. Magnus did this. My son, in his arrogance and his certainty that he knew better than I did about the nature of the warp, has attempted to send me a warning through psychic means. He discovered the treachery of Horus, learned of the War Master's corruption by chaos, and sought to inform me of this betrayal before it could spread further. His intentions were noble. His methodology was catastrophically flawed. I had warned him against the use of sorcery, had forbidden him from delving too deeply into the secrets of the warp, but I had not explained why. I had not told him about the webway project, had not shared the details of my grand plan because I believed the knowledge too dangerous to spread even among my most trusted sons. So Magnus acted in ignorance. He breached the psychic wards I had placed around Terra, shattered the defenses I had spent decades constructing, tore a hole in reality that allowed the very entities I had been trying to protect humanity from to gain access to the heart of the Imperium. The Webway Project, my grand hope for humanity's future, became a battleground where demons poured through in endless waves. I was forced to abandon the Great Crusade entirely, to sit upon the Golden Throne day after day, holding the breach closed through sheer psychic force while the Imperium tore itself apart in civil war. The Tzeentchian whisper comes again, more insistent this time, more poisonous. You could have prevented this. One conversation, one moment of trust. Tell Magnus about the webway, explain why sorcery was forbidden, treat him as a son rather than a tool to be used and discarded. Would it have been so difficult? Would it have cost you so much? I want to scream that it was not that simple, that the knowledge Magnus sought was itself a form of corruption, that explaining the webway would have required revealing secrets that could not be safely shared. But the defense rings hollow even to me, because buried beneath the strategic justifications and tactical necessities is a simpler truth that I can no longer deny. I did not trust my sons with the full scope of my plans. I treated them as generals to be deployed rather than partners to be consulted. I built them to be weapons, perfect and terrible, but I never allowed them to be anything more than that. Magnus fell because I failed him. This is not the lie of chaos, but the bitter truth I have carried for 10,000 years. My son reached out to me in desperation, trying to save the Imperium from treachery, and his efforts were turned against him because I had kept him ignorant of the larger context. The Webway Project failed not because Magnus was weak or foolish, but because I was too proud to share my burdens with those I had created to help bear them. The memory shifts again, and now I am forced to relive the moment when I learned of Magnus's attack on Prospero. Leman Russ, the Space Wolf, had been sent to bring Magnus back to Terra to answer for his crimes. But Horus, already deep in his betrayal, had altered the orders. Instead of capture, Russ was instructed to execute. The Thousand Suns Legion was destroyed, their home world burned, their gene seeds scattered across the galaxy. Magnus himself was broken, driven into the arms of the very chaos powers I had sought to protect him from. transformed into a demon prince who now serves Tzeentch with the same dedication he once showed the Imperium. I could have stopped it. If I had not been pinned to the golden throne holding the webway breach closed, I could have intervened. I could have clarified the orders, prevented the misunderstanding that led to Magnus's damnation, but I was needed here. My power devoted entirely to the task of keeping the demons from overrunning Terra. So I let it happen. I chose the survival of the Imperium over the survival of my son, and Magnus was lost because of that choice. The Tzeentchian whisper laughs, a sound like breaking glass and grinding metal. Failure upon failure, father. You built an empire on lies and secrets, and your sons paid the price for your arrogance. Look at what you have wrought. Look at what your vision has become. 10,000 years of stagnation and decay. A galaxy drowning in ignorance and superstition. All because you could not bring yourself to trust those who loved you most. The words cut deeper than any blade because they carry just enough truth to make them impossible to fully dismiss. The Imperium I see through the limited psychic awareness I can spare from maintaining the Astronomicon is not the golden age I envisioned on the plains of Ulanor. It is a corpse empire, sustained only by endless sacrifice and religious fanaticism, where the pursuit of knowledge has been replaced by mindless dogma, and the dream of human unity has become a nightmare of oppression and control. But I cannot surrender to despair. Cannot allow the whispers to erode my will, because the moment I give in is the moment the Astronomicon fails and humanity is plunged into darkness. So I push back against the Tzeentchian influence, force the poisoned memories away, and cling to what I know to be true. I failed Magnus. I failed many of my sons. But the alternative to my failures was not a better world. It was no world at all. Chaos offered nothing but damnation. The choices I made, the secrets I kept, the sons I sacrificed, all of it was necessary to give humanity any chance at survival. Whether those chances were worth the cost is a question I can no longer afford to consider. The memory releases me, and I am back in the eternal present of the Golden Throne. The custodians still stand their vigil. The machinery still hums with its dying rhythm. The Astronomicon still burns at the core of my being, demanding every scrap of power I can provide. Nothing has changed. Nothing will ever change. This is my existence, and it will continue until the throne fails or I do, whichever comes first. But there is another memory waiting, one I have tried to avoid for 10 millennia because it is the most painful of all. It surfaces now despite my resistance, drawn forth by the psychic assault of the Chaos Gods who understand exactly how to make me suffer most effectively. I am aboard the Vengeful Spirit, Horus's flagship, in the final moments of the war that tore the Imperium apart. The corridors of the ship are littered with bodies. Loyalists and traitors lie together in death, their blood mixing on the deck plates in patterns that might have been artistic if they were not so horrifying. The air is thick with smoke and the stench of burning flesh, punctuated by the screams of the dying and the roar of bolter fire from distant compartments, where the battle still rages. But I am not concerned with the battle. I am here for a single purpose: to confront the son who has betrayed everything I tried to build, who has damned himself and dragged half the Imperium down with him into the service of powers that will destroy us all if given the chance. I find Horus in the throne room of his flagship, a chamber that had once been a place of strategic planning and military coordination but has been transformed into something obscene. The walls are covered in symbols that hurt to look at: 8-pointed stars and other marks of chaos worship that pulse with unnatural energy. The air itself feels wrong, as if the boundary between the material realm and the warp has grown thin here, allowing the influence of the dark gods to seep through into reality. But I barely notice the corruption of the chamber because my attention is fixed on the thing that lies broken at Horus's feet. Sanguinius, the angel, the most beloved of all my sons, whose beauty and nobility had inspired loyalty and devotion in all who knew him. He is dead, his body torn and battered beyond recognition, his magnificent wings shattered, his armor rent by claws and blades that channeled the power of the warp itself. Horus killed him. My son killed his brother and did it with such savagery that even in death, Sanguinius's face shows the agony of his final moments. The grief is instant and overwhelming, a pain that transcends anything physical and strikes at the very core of my being. Sanguinius had been pure in a way few beings ever achieve. His dedication to the Imperium absolute, his faith in the dream of human unity unshakable. He should have lived to see the golden age I promised. Instead, he died here, in this corrupted place, at the hands of the brother he had once stood beside on the plains of Ulanor. But I cannot afford to indulge my grief because Horus is turning toward me now, and what I see in his face is not my son but something that wears his flesh like a puppet. The Chaos Gods have claimed him completely, poured their power into his form until he has become a living conduit for their will. He is beautiful and terrible, clad in armor that shifts and changes with every heartbeat, decorated with symbols that make my eyes water to look upon. His voice, when he speaks, carries harmonics that no human throat could produce, layers of sound that suggest the presence of entities speaking through him from beyond the veil. Father, he says, and the word is a mockery of the affection we once shared. Have you come to beg for mercy, to plead with me to abandon this path and return to your failed dream? It is too late for that. I have seen the truth that you tried to hide from us. The galaxy belongs to the powers now, and they have chosen me as their instrument. Kneel before your new master or be destroyed. The arrogance in his voice, the absolute certainty that he has chosen the winning side, ignites something in me that I have kept carefully controlled for millennia. Rage. Not the cold, calculated anger of a general who has been betrayed by a subordinate, but the hot, primal fury of a father whose son has spat on everything he tried to give him. I feel my power gathering. The psychic might that I have spent so carefully, rationed so precisely, now building toward a release that will shake the foundations of reality itself. We fight. Not with weapons, though weapons are involved, but with pure will, our psychic presences clashing in a battle that transcends the physical and spills over into the Imperium. The vengeful spirit shudders under the forces we unleash, its structure groaning as reality itself bends and warps around us. I am stronger than Horus. I have always been stronger, but he is empowered by all four of the Chaos Gods, their combined might channeled through his form, and that power is enough to make the fight far closer than it should be. He strikes me. The blow is not merely physical, though it tears through my armor and breaks the bones beneath. It is a psychic attack as well, a lance of corrupted power that pierces my defenses and lodges itself in my very essence. I feel the taint of chaos spreading through me like poison. Feel the whispers of the dark gods promising power and immortality if I will only surrender to them. The pain is beyond description, beyond any mortal frame of reference. It is the kind of wound that should kill even one such as I, and I know with absolute certainty that if I do not act immediately, it will do exactly that. But more than the pain, more than the knowledge of my impending death, what breaks me in that moment is seeing what Horus has become. This is not corruption that was forced upon him. This is a choice he made, a path he walked willingly despite every warning I gave him, despite the example of Magnus and the other fallen Primarchs. He looked at the offer the Chaos Gods made, weighed it against loyalty to me and to the Imperium, and chose damnation. My son, my greatest creation, the one I trusted above all others, has betrayed me so completely that there is no possibility of redemption. I could save him, even now, Even with the power of all 4 chaos gods flowing through him, I could reach into his soul and burn away the corruption, could restore him to what he was before the fall. The technique exists within my knowledge, the application of psychic force precise enough to excise the taint without destroying the host. I have used it before on other corrupted individuals, have saved loyal servants from the influence of the warp through sheer application of will and expertise. I could do it for Horus, I could bring my son back, but the cost would be everything. To save Horus, I would need to devote my full power to the task, would need to lower my defenses and focus entirely on the delicate work of purging his soul. And in that moment of vulnerability, the chaos gods would strike. Not just at me, but at Terra, at the weakened defenses of the Imperial Palace, at the webway breach I have been holding closed through force of will. They would pour through in endless waves, would consume the throne world and use it as a beachhead for the final destruction of humanity. One son, or the survival of the species. One person I love, or billions I am sworn to protect. The choice is not really a choice at all, but making it feels like tearing out my own heart. I gather my power, not the controlled, measured force I have used throughout the battle, but everything I have, every scrap of psychic might accumulated over 30,000 years of existence. I focus it into a single point, a lance of pure will that I drive through Horus's chest and directly into his soul. Not to purge the corruption, but to obliterate it. Soul and corruption together burned away in an instant of absolute power that leaves nothing behind except empty flesh. My son dies. Not just his body, but his essence, his soul, everything that made him what he was. I do not simply kill him. I erase him from existence, remove him so completely that even the chaos gods cannot claim his spirit for their own purposes. It is the most thorough form of execution possible, and I deliver it to my own son, my beloved Horus, the one I trusted to carry my dream forward after I completed the Webway project. The body falls. The light goes out of eyes that had once looked at me with affection and respect and perfect trust. The chaos gods scream in fury at being denied their prize, but their screams are distant and meaningless compared to the howling void that has opened up inside me. I have killed my son. I have murdered the future I wanted to create, and I have done it with my own hands, because that was the only way to ensure that the job was done properly. The wound Horus inflicted does not heal. I am dying, my body broken beyond even my ability to repair. My psychic essence damaged in ways that will never fully recover. My warriors find me in the throne room of the vengeful spirit, carry me back to Terra, where the finest medical equipment in the Imperium is mobilized in a desperate attempt to save my life. But we all know the truth. I cannot be saved. The best that can be achieved is a form of stasis. A suspension between life and death that will preserve my consciousness while my body slowly fails. They place me on the golden throne. The device I built to power the webway becomes my prison and my life support. Its mechanisms adapted to keep me functioning even as my physical form deteriorates. I have been here ever since. 10,000 years of watching the Imperium I built decay into a grotesque parody of everything I wanted it to be. 10,000 years of feeling Horus's death like a fresh wound that never heals. 10,000 years of wondering if I made the right choice, if there was some other way, some path I did not see that would have saved both my son and humanity. The Tzeentchian whisper returns, more insistent than ever. You murdered him. You who claim to fight for humanity, who speak of unity and brotherhood. You destroyed your own son rather than risk yourself to save him. What does that make you, Father? What kind of monster wears the mask of humanity's savior while committing such atrocities? I have no answer. The question has haunted me for 100 centuries, and I am no closer to resolving it now than I was in the moment I pulled the trigger. All I know is that the species survived. Humanity continues to exist, scattered across 1,000,000 worlds, enduring in the face of threats that would destroy any lesser civilization. The price was everything I loved, everyone I cared about, and my own eternal torment. But the alternative was extinction, and that was not acceptable. The memory releases me, and I am back on the golden throne, the weight of 10 millennia pressing down on my consciousness like a physical force. The custodians stand their vigil. The machinery hums its dying song. The Astronomicon burns at the core of my being. And deep in the warp, beyond the thin veil that separates reality from nightmare, the Chaos Gods press their assault against my defenses with renewed vigor. They have been attacking me for 10,000 years, and in all that time they have never stopped, never paused, never given me a moment of true rest. This is their purpose, their eternal goal: to break me, to corrupt me, to turn the Emperor of mankind into their greatest servant, or to destroy me entirely and watch humanity fall into the darkness. They use every weapon at their disposal, every tactic their infinite malevolence can devise. And the most effective weapon they have found is my own memories, twisted and distorted until they become instruments of torture more effective than any physical pain. The assault comes in waves, coordinated by entities whose intelligence is vast but utterly inhuman, whose understanding of suffering is both perfect and completely without empathy. I feel them pressing against the barriers I have erected, testing for weaknesses, probing for vulnerabilities that they can exploit. The attack is not merely psychic, though that component is certainly present. It is existential, a challenge to my very right to exist, a denial of everything I have fought to preserve. Nurgle comes first, as he often does, because his philosophy appeals to something deep in the part of me that is still capable of despair. The Plague God does not attack with violence or hatred. He offers comfort, release, the sweet, gentle decay that comes when the struggle finally ends and you allow yourself to simply stop fighting. His voice is a whisper in the darkness, soft and grandfatherly, carrying tones of genuine affection and concern. You have suffered so long, my child. 10,000 years of pain, 10,000 years of watching everything you built crumble and decay. Why do you continue this pointless struggle? There is no victory waiting at the end of this road. No moment when you can lay down your burden and rest. There is only more suffering, more death, more bitter disappointment as the Imperium you created continues its slow collapse into irrelevance. The words carry power beyond their simple meaning, backed by the full psychic might of a god whose domain is entropy and despair. I feel the weight of them settling onto my shoulders like a blanket, heavy and warm and strangely comforting. It would be so easy to accept what he offers, to simply let go of the Astronomicon and allow the darkness to claim me. The suffering would end. The responsibility would lift. I could rest finally after millennia of ceaseless duty. The temptation is not abstract. It is visceral, immediate, a genuine offer of peace that calls to every exhausted fiber of my being. But I have faced this offer before 1,000,000 times across the endless centuries, and I know what accepting it would mean. Nurgle's peace is not rest but annihilation, but his comfort is the comfort of the grave, the stillness of a corpse that no longer feels pain because it no longer feels anything at all. To accept his offer would be to betray every sacrifice that has been made in my name, every psyker who died to fuel the throne, every soldier who gave their life believing that the Emperor would protect them. I resist, not with violence because violence is Khorne's domain and would only feed the power of another god, but with simple, stubborn persistence. I am the Emperor of mankind. I was ancient when the first humans learned to make fire, and I will endure long after the last star has gone cold. My suffering is meaningless compared to the survival of my species. My pain is irrelevant. I will not yield. The Nurglesque influence retreats, but only to make room for something else. Tzeentch, the changer of ways, does not offer comfort. He offers hope, but hope twisted into a weapon. Hope that cuts deeper than any despair because it promises exactly what I want most and makes that promise into a trap. The vision comes without warning, flooding my consciousness with images of futures that might be, of paths not taken, of possibilities that still exist if I am only willing to reach for them. I see the Imperium reformed, its bureaucracy streamlined, its military strengthened, its people united under a banner of reason rather than superstition. I see the Webway project completed, humanity free to expand across the galaxy without fear of demonic corruption. I see my sons restored, the fallen Primarchs purged of their taint and returned to my service, their legions reunited under the Aquila. It is beautiful. It is everything I wanted when I began the Great Crusade. Everything I dreamed of during those brief golden moments on Ulanor. And Tzeentch whispers that it is still possible, that the key to achieving this future lies in changing, in abandoning the rigid adherence to failed strategies that has characterized the Imperium for 10,000 years. You see the stagnation, the whisper says, silky and seductive. The Imperium you built has calcified into a corpse empire sustained only by ignorance and fear, but it does not have to be this way. Change is the fundamental law of existence, the engine that drives all progress and improvement. Embrace change, accept that your original vision must be modified to account for current realities. The future you want is still within reach, if you are only willing to adapt. The offer is more insidious than Nurgle's because it carries a grain of truth. The Imperium is stagnant. The dream I had of human unity and progress has been replaced by a nightmare of religious oppression and technological regression. If I could change things, if I could reach out from my throne and reshape the institutions that claim to serve in my name, perhaps I could still salvage something from the wreckage of my vision. But I know Tzeentch. I know that his promises of change are always lies, that his visions of better futures are traps designed to lure the unwary into damnation. The changes he suggests would not improve the Imperium. They would corrupt it, would introduce instabilities that the Chaos Gods could exploit, would create the very vulnerabilities that have been kept at bay through rigid adherence to doctrine and tradition. The Imperium is stagnant because stagnation is safer than the alternative, because any change at this scale would create opportunities for the forces of chaos to expand their influence. I resist again, pushing back against the visions with the same stubborn refusal that I used against Nurgle's offer. The future Tzeentch shows me is a lie. The path he suggests leads only to damnation. I will not be tempted by false hope, will not abandon the strategies that have kept humanity alive for 10,000 years simply because they are uncomfortable or inefficient. The Imperium may be a corpse empire, but it is still an empire, and that is more than most species can claim in this cursed galaxy. Khorne comes next, and his approach is the opposite of Tzeentch's subtlety. The blood god does not whisper. He roars. His presence is a tsunami of rage and violence that crashes against my psychic defenses with enough force to shake the Golden Throne itself. He does not tempt or cajole. He demands. Release it, he bellows, his voice like the grinding of tectonic plates and the roar of dying stars. Release the power you have been hoarding, the strength you have wasted on futile defense and pointless preservation. You are a warrior. The greatest warrior humanity has ever produced. Why do you sit passive on this throne of cowardice when you could be unleashing your fury upon the enemies of mankind? The vision he shows me is not subtle either. I see myself rising from the Golden Throne, my full power unleashed, no longer constrained by the need to maintain the Astronomicon or hold the Webway breach closed. I see the Chaos Gods themselves recoiling before my wrath, their demons burned away by psychic fire that scours the Imperium clean. I see the traitor legions destroyed, their fortress worlds reduced to ash, vengeance delivered with absolute and terrible efficiency. It is glorious. It is what every fiber of my being wants to do because I am at my core what Khorne says I am, a warrior, a conqueror, a being built for battle and tested in the fires of 10,000 conflicts. The rage I feel at what has been done to my Imperium, at the betrayal of my sons, at the endless suffering inflicted on the species I was created to protect, it burns inside me like a star going supernova. Khorne offers me the release of that rage, the satisfaction of watching my enemies burn. But I know what releasing that power would cost. The Astronomicon would fail instantly. The webway breach would explode outward, consuming Terra and everyone on it. The Imperium would be plunged into darkness, every ship in the warp lost, every world isolated, every human settlement left to fend for itself against the forces of chaos and the predations of Xenos raiders. My vengeance would be absolute, but it would also be the end of everything I have fought to preserve. Khorne does not care about these consequences. He is not interested in preservation or strategy or the long-term survival of humanity. He wants only the glory of battle, the satisfaction of skulls taken and blood spilled, the perfect violence of total war without constraint or mercy. To give him what he demands would be to betray every principle I have ever held, to become the very thing I have spent 30,000 years fighting against. I refuse. The effort costs me dearly, requires me to suppress the very rage that Khorne is trying to inflame, but I do it anyway. I will not be goaded into destroying what I have sacrificed everything to protect. My anger is mine to control, and I will not surrender it to a god whose only interest is the maximization of violence. The fourth attack comes from Slaanesh, and it is the most dangerous of all. Because what the Prince of Pleasure offers is not hope or rage or decay, but something far more insidious. An end to pain, not through death, not through surrender, but through the simple cessation of suffering without the loss of consciousness that would come with either of the other options. The voice is beautiful beyond description, carrying harmonics that speak directly to every aesthetic sense I possess. You have endured so much, it purrs, gentle and seductive. 10,000 years of agony, 10,000 years of feeling every death of every psyker sacrificed to keep you functional. The pain never stops, never fades, never becomes bearable through familiarity. But it could. I can give you that gift. The suffering can end, and you can continue your duty without the burden of sensation that makes every moment a fresh torture. The offer is accompanied by a vision of what that existence would be like. I see myself still on the throne, still maintaining the Astronomicon, still performing every function that my current state demands. But the pain is gone. The crushing weight of psychic assault, the physical agony of a body that should have died millennia ago, the emotional torment of memories twisted into weapons, all of it simply stops. I would be free to focus entirely on my duty, unencumbered by the suffering that currently consumes 99% of my attention. It is the most tempting offer I have received because, unlike the others, it does not require me to abandon my purpose or betray my principles. I could accept what Slaanesh offers and still protect humanity, could still maintain the Imperium, could still serve as the Emperor without the constant distraction of unbearable agony. The only thing I would lose is the pain itself. And why should I cling to pain? What purpose does it serve except to make my existence marginally more difficult? But I know Slaanesh as I know the others. The Prince of Pleasure deals in addiction and excess, in the slow corruption that comes when sensation is divorced from meaning. To accept the offer would be to take the first step down a path that leads inevitably to damnation. The pain I feel is not meaningless. It is the price I pay for the mistakes I made, the reminder of every soul sacrificed in my name, the connection to the reality of what the Imperium has become. Without the pain, I would lose that connection. I would become the god my subjects believe me to be, distant and inhuman, concerned only with grand strategy and uncaring about the individual lives that make up the vast machine of the Imperium. The pain makes me human. Or at least it makes me something close to human, reminds me that beneath the psychic power and the millennia of accumulated knowledge, I was once a man who cared about more than mere survival. To give up that pain would be to give up the last connection I have to what I was, and that is a price I am not willing to pay. I refuse Slaanesh as I refused the others. The effort leaves me weakened, my psychic defenses battered by the coordinated assault of all 4 chaos gods, but I endure. I always endure. That is what I do. That is all I can do. The attacks do not stop. They never stop. This is my existence, a constant battle against entities whose power dwarfs anything the material universe can produce, whose patience is infinite, whose hatred of me is matched only by their desire to corrupt or destroy everything I represent. They will keep attacking until the moment the Golden Throne fails or I do, and then they will finally achieve what they have been working toward for 10,000 years, but not yet. Not today. Today, I hold. Today, I maintain the Astronomicon. Today, I protect the species that no longer remembers what I actually am, that worships me as a god rather than recognizing me as the flawed, broken thing I have become. Today, I endure. And then, in the midst of the eternal assault, in the space between one moment of agony and the next, something changes. It is small, so small that I almost miss it entirely. A tiny fluctuation in the vast ocean of psychic noise that surrounds me at all times. But it is there, and it is different from everything else I sense. A prayer. Not the kind of prayer I usually perceive, not the mindless chanting of the Adeptus Ministorum or the rote recitations of planetary governors seeking my blessing on their policies. This is something else entirely. This is pure, this is honest. This is the desperate cry of a soul that has no expectation of being heard but speaks anyway. Because there is nothing else left to do, I focus on it. A monumental effort that requires me to divert attention from the Astronomicon and the psychic defense and the 1,000 other demands that consume my awareness. The prayer comes from far away, from a ship lost in the warp, from a human being who is about to die and knows it. The frigate is called the Pilgrim's Hope, and it is breaking apart at the seams. I see it through the psychic connection established by the prayer. See its Geller field flickering and failing. See the warp storms that batter it from every direction. The crew is dying. Most of them have already succumbed to the madness that comes when the barriers between reality and the immaterium collapse, their minds shattered by exposure to entities that should never be perceived by human consciousness. But the captain still holds on. She is young, barely past her 3rd decade, and she knows nothing about void warfare or warp navigation beyond what she learned in the most basic training courses. She received her commission through family connections rather than merit. Assigned to command the Pilgrim's Hope because it was considered a safe posting, a routine supply run that would give her experience without exposing her to real danger. She has been tested beyond anything her training prepared her for. The warp storm hit without warning, tore them from their planned route, and flung them into regions of the immaterium where reality has no meaning, and the predators that lurk in the dark between dimensions circle like sharks sensing blood. Her crew is gone. Her ship is dying. She has no hope of survival, no expectation of rescue, no reason to believe that anything she does in these final moments will matter. But she prays anyway. Not because she expects the Emperor to save her, not because she believes her faith will be rewarded with some miraculous intervention. She prays because it is the last human thing she can do. because in the face of absolute annihilation, the act of reaching out to something greater than herself is the only way to maintain her dignity and her sanity. She prays for courage. She prays for the strength to face what is coming without breaking. She prays that her death will mean something, even if that meaning is invisible to her. Her prayer burns in my consciousness like a candle flame in an infinite darkness. It is insignificant compared to the forces arrayed against me, meaningless in the context of the grand strategic calculations that govern my existence. She is one person, one ship, one tiny fragment of humanity among trillions spread across the galaxy. Her survival or death changes nothing in the larger equation. The resources required to save her would be better spent maintaining the Astronomicon, or defending against the next chaos assault, or any of 1,000 other tasks that have greater strategic importance. But in this moment, reading the purity of her prayer and feeling the absolute honesty of her fear and her courage, I remember something I had almost forgotten. I remember what it was like to care about individual human beings rather than treating them as statistical abstractions. I remember the man I was before I became the Emperor, before I took on the burden of protecting an entire species, before I learned to make the cold calculations that sacrifice millions to save billions. Her name is Serena Valdez. She has a family on a distant agri-world, parents who do not know she is about to die, siblings who will mourn her when the news finally reaches them. She has dreams that will never be fulfilled, hopes that will never be realized, a future that will end in the next few minutes when the Geller field fails completely and the demons tear through the hull of her ship. I make a choice. It is not a strategic choice. It is not a rational choice. It is the choice of someone who still remembers what it means to be human, who still believes that individual lives matter even when they are lost in the vastness of galactic conflict. I reach out, not with my full power, because that would be impossible without abandoning the Astronomicon and condemning billions to death in the darkness, but with a fraction of my will, an infinitesimal sliver of psychic force that costs me dearly to spare but is still more power than any mortal psyker could dream of wielding. I find the coordinates where the Pilgrim's hope is dying. I push back against the warp storm, not to dispel it entirely, but to create a moment of stability, a brief window when the currents of the Imperium align in a pattern that will allow the ship to escape back into real space. The effort is precise beyond human comprehension, requires me to manipulate psychic forces across distances that have no meaning in conventional terms, to time my intervention to coincide with the ship's own desperate attempts at navigation. The cost is immediate and terrible. The Chaos Gods sense my distraction, recognize the weakness created by diverting resources from my defenses. They press their assault with renewed vigor, pouring their power through the gaps I have opened in my psychic barriers. The pain intensifies beyond anything I have felt in centuries, a suffering so complete that it threatens to overwhelm even my ability to endure. But I hold. I hold because Serena Valdez deserves to live, because her prayer deserves to be answered, because in a galaxy full of horrors and suffering and meaningless death, sometimes the only way to remain human is to do something that makes no strategic sense whatsoever. The warp storm parts. For exactly 3 seconds the currents align, and a pathway opens through the chaos. The Pilgrim's hope, operating on auxiliary power and held together by prayers and desperation, manages to limp through the gap. The ship's navigator, one of the few crew members still clinging to sanity, sees the opportunity and takes it without hesitation. They punch through into real space, emerging battered and broken but alive in a system far from their intended destination, but close enough to civilization that rescue is possible. On the bridge of the Pilgrim's Hope, Serena Valdez collapses to her knees in exhaustion and relief. She does not know why the storm parted. She does not understand the mechanics of what just happened, or recognize the Emperor's intervention in her survival. She believes it was luck or fate, or perhaps the blessing of the Emperor manifesting through natural phenomena rather than direct action. But I know that I saved her. I know that one ship, one captain, one prayer received an answer when it should have been lost among the billions of other desperate pleas that reach me every day and go unanswered because I simply do not have the capacity to respond to them all. The cost has been paid in full. The Chaos God's assault redoubles in intensity, exploiting the weakness I created, tearing at my defenses with savage glee. The next 1,000 psychers are brought forward for the daily tithe, and their deaths are even more agonizing than usual because I am weakened, less able to shield myself from the full horror of their final moments. The pain is beyond description, beyond any reference point that human language can capture. But Serena Valdez is alive. The Pilgrim's hope survived. One prayer was answered. I am still trapped on the Golden Throne. I am still dying slowly across millennia that feel like seconds and seconds that feel like millennia. The Imperium is still a corpse empire, sustained only by sacrifice and ignorance. The Chaos Gods still press their eternal assault against my will, seeking to break me or corrupt me or destroy me entirely. Nothing has changed. Everything continues exactly as it did before. The machinery still hums its dying song. The custodians still stand their vigil. The Astronomicon still burns at the core of my being, demanding every scrap of power I can provide. But for one ship, for one captain, for one brief moment in the endless darkness, I was still the emperor of mankind. I was still the protector of humanity. I was still capable of caring about the fate of a single individual rather than treating them as a statistic in the vast calculus of species survival. And for that, I endure. For that tiny moment of purpose, for that brief connection to what I was before I became this broken thing on a golden throne, I continue the fight. I hold the line against the Chaos Gods. I maintain the Astronomicon. I consume the daily tithe of psychers. I carry the weight of 10,000 years of accumulated suffering and guilt and failure. Because sometimes, just sometimes, a prayer is answered. Sometimes the Emperor protects not through grand strategic intervention or the deployment of massive military forces, but through the simple act of noticing that one individual human being is about to die and choosing for no logical reason whatsoever to prevent that death. The Chaos Gods laugh at my weakness, at the price I paid for such a meaningless gesture. Nurgle whispers that I could have let her die and saved myself the suffering. Tzeentch suggests that my intervention has disrupted larger plans and created new problems that I cannot foresee. Khorne bellows that I wasted power on mercy when I should have used it for destruction. Slaanesh purrs that the pain I accepted in exchange for one life saved is proof of my foolish attachment to obsolete concepts of individual worth. They are probably right. The strategic value of saving Serena Valdez is negligible to non-existent. The resources I expended could have been used more efficiently on 1,000 other tasks. The suffering I accepted in exchange for her survival serves no purpose beyond making my existence marginally more difficult. But I do not care. In this one moment, stripped of strategic calculation and cold logic, I choose to care about one person. I choose to be what my subjects believe I am rather than what I have been forced to become. I choose to be the emperor who protects, the guardian of mankind, the father of humanity. And in making that choice, I remember something crucial. I remember why I am doing this. Not the strategic reasons, not the grand visions of human unity and progress, but the simple, fundamental truth that has sustained me through 10,000 years of torture. I am doing this because human beings like Serena Valdez deserve to live, because their prayers matter, because in a galaxy full of horrors, someone needs to stand against the darkness and say no further. Because the alternative to my suffering is the extinction of everything I have ever cared about. The pain continues, the assault continues, the slow degradation of my physical form continues, the Imperium's decay continues, everything that is wrong with my existence continues unchanged. But I endure. Not because I am strong, though I am. Not because I am wise, though I have accumulated wisdom across 30,000 years. Not because I have any hope that this situation will improve, or any expectation that my suffering will one day end. I endure because Serena Valdez prayed for courage and I gave it to her. I endure because somewhere in the galaxy a ship called the Pilgrim's Hope is limping towards safety, its crew alive against all odds. I endure because sometimes, just sometimes, the Emperor of mankind still protects, and that will have to be enough. The silent war continues. The Chaos Gods press their assault. The machinery groans. The custodians stand their vigil. The Astronomicon burns. And on the golden throne, trapped between life and death, suffering beyond the comprehension of any mortal mind, a fragment of something that was once a man named Revelation but is now called the Emperor holds the line for one more day. Because that is what he does, that is all he can do. And in a galaxy where hope is the cruelest lie and mercy is the rarest gift, it is enough.